Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're kicking off the Cultural Wonder Guide for Humankind, starting with the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in the Ancient Era. Now the reason why we're jumping into this guide series is because one of my subscribers posted a tier list in my Discord channel discussing the tier list for cultural wonders in the game, and they had the Hanging Gardens of Babylon last on the tier list. And I think this creates a confusion for most players because at first glance, when you look at what this building can do, it doesn't seem that impressive compared to the other wonders in this era. You essentially get 20 points of stability and 100 points of fame on completion. It looks the most vanilla of all the wonders in this era. That includes things like the pyramid, which can reduce your district construction cost by 25% going forward, which seems to be everyone's favorite wonder in this era. But honestly, I think the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in certain conditions can outperform even the Pyramid of Giza. So let's talk about this wonder and discuss some of the uses and how luxury resources work in the game. So first thing, this is an ancient era cultural wonder. So you'll be able to grab this once you reach the ancient era. It'll be the first set of wonders you can claim. And the cost for the first claim is 250 influence. And usually, depending on the number of AI factions you have in the game, you're only going to be able to claim one. So you have to decide if this is the one you want. If you happen to be really ahead on influence, or you have very few AI factions, then you could technically claim this second, and it will cost you 450, and so forth. It will increase with each new wonder you have claimed. The build cost will stay the same at 1,400 industry. This is pretty standard for all the ancient era wonders, so no need to really emphasize this. But the condition that we must notice here is you must place this building, or the wonder, on the luxury resource. And this is going to be quite key to its secret usage. So let's talk about luxury resources in Humankind. There are a total of 20 luxury resources, 5 for each of the FIMs, or food, industry, money, and science. And they work with 5 different effects. That is the same for each of the resources, just change the resources for the corresponding luxury. For example, salt, dye, incense, and ambergris will provide 5 points of their corresponding resource to the city. So salt will add 5 food, dyes will add 5 industry, incense will add 5 money, and ambergris will add 5 science for all your cities. So this scales really well into the late game when you have multiple cities set up. In the early game, your city cap is 2. Typically going 1 over your city cap is okay. So at most in the ancient era, you're going to have potentially 3 sets of cities, each receiving +5 per salt resource or per dye resource. So if you have multiple salt, multiple dyes, this will stack. And quite a big bonus, because if you look at the second group here, each main plaza and administrative center will get +3. So this will be the capital of your city plus the outposts that you have attached. So administrative centers are basically outpost centers that you have attached to a city, and you get +3. So if you're playing a bit tall in terms of adding multiple territories to a city, you can outperform the first group of resources, because even with 1 attached, you're getting 6 points per city per resource. Pretty good. Then the next one is per worker for all cities. So if you have 2 worker of that corresponding resource, in this case, farmers for food, workers for industry, scientists for science, and merchants or traders for money, you get 2 points extra of their resources per worker. So this scales with population into the late game, scales with number of job slots you have for those resources, and it will outperform both of the first 2 that we talked about. And then for the fourth group here is 2% of the corresponding districts. By districts, I mean quarters. So food quarters would be farmer quarter, and you have the industry quarters, you have the merchant quarters, and the research quarters. So each of those regular quarters, industry quarters would be maker's quarter. So the plain old maker's quarter, the farmer's quarter, the merchant quarter, and the research quarter, they will each give you 2% boost of their resource. So this scales the most into the late game because it's a percentage scale. And the question here is, how many T resources can we have? Well, each luxury will spawn onto the map between 4 to 6 copies. It's either 4 or 6. You can't have an odd number. And that means for a certain resource like tea, you could have up to 12% boost to food if you have all 6 under your control, which is quite powerful. And it will scale slightly different than the others. Mainly the bigger your base, the better your results. And then finally, the last group is addition on the number of quarters you have, so the districts. So each of your farmers' quarter, each of your workers' quarter, each of your merchants' quarter, and research quarter will get 2 more points of their resources based on each saffron, each silk, each gemstone that you have. This starts out the slowest because you end up with a situation that you need to not only build your city, you also need to build all these districts, you need to sustain them with stability. But compared to population with this third category of number of workers, it's a little bit more stable because I could have all those quarters built even if I don't have the food to sustain the population. As long as I'm exploiting the tile, I can pick up this +2. Whereas the workers require you to maintain a big population, because many times you find your cities under your population limit because you can't produce enough food to sustain them in all the quarters. But you have the extra quarters, therefore these districts will still provide you the resource if you have the resource from the 5th category. So these are all things you should consider. Essentially, the first 2 works best in the early game because you have your cities and main plazas ready right away. And the districts will work later on. The percentage will work throughout the game, but works the best in the late game once you have a very established city. And the workers will work when you have a big population and a very well-built city that has to correlate with the district. So they all have a small difference here, but essentially they all will increase resources of that type. And we're talking about these resources here because there's something called patronage that exists in the game. And patronage is a early modern era tech that you can research. And essentially it'll give you the playhouse infrastructure, the inventor's workshop. We're not going to talk about those. They're not important here. We're going to talk about the luxury manufactory, which is a special district you can place on the map. For each of these, you get 50 points of fame. And only 1 copy of these can be built for each resource in the game. So once you build it on a luxury resource, no other faction can build it on the resource of the same type, even if they own it. So there's an incentive to rush patronage. And once you have the luxury manufactory built on one of your resources, you get the 50 fame, the 3 money per adjacent market quarter, the 5 influence, and all your cities will receive an extra yield based on the luxury's yield type, as well as an extra stability yield. And that's all the game says. It doesn't tell you the 5% per resource. That's something I put there to tell you exactly how much. And the stability boost is going to be 10 points extra. And for you to get these effects and for you to build the luxury manufactory, you must also own over half of this resource on the map. You can own it either by having it in your cities or by buying it from other factions that have control of this. But once you have over half, you're allowed to build the luxury manufactory. And once you build it, you activate what's called the Wonders effect, which is this additional yield percentage, as well as the additional stability boost for those resources. So for example, let's use salt. Typically, when I have a salt, for each copy of salt I have, I'll get 5 points on the city with food. So each of my city will get 5 extra food for each copy of salt I have. On top of that, I'll get 4 points of stability for each salt I have. Every single luxury resource, each copy will give you 4 points of stability in all cities. So it's a great way to maintain big cities because they provide a lot of good stability boosts, which is why buying and trading them is good for you because every traded copy also counts as though you own it. So this means we already have 5x food from salt and 4x stability from salt. Let's say there are 6 copy totals on the map. It's either 4 or 6, and we happen to have half of that. So let's say 3. Then we get 15 food for each city and 12 points stability for each city. But if we build the luxury manufactory over one of the salt that we own, you can only build it once, then all the salt will get an additional effect called the wondrous effect. And this is equivalent to 5% additional yield of the resource type, which means I'm going to get 5% food for all my cities for each salt under my control. That includes salt that I buy. But I must have at least one salt in my city to put down the luxury manufactory, and I must control at least half of the salt in the game. If both conditions are satisfied, I will get that 5% additional boost, and then a 10-point stability boost as well, which means my salt is going to give me 14 points of stability per salt resource, and also the 5 base value plus 5%. So I'll get 15 points added to every city, and then a 15% multiplier added to every city. That's a huge boost. And that's why luxury manufacturing is very strong. You want to rush it. You want to control all the resources because you can get the same percentage boost for industry. You can get the same percentage boost for money for each resource type, right? So if I control dye, ebony, marble, obsidian, silk, and I get 5% boost of all of them, let's say there's 4 copies of each on the map, that's 20% each for 5, 100% industry in all my cities, just by owning all 5 luxury manufacturing of each of these resources. Now, this sounds wonderful, and you also get a ton of stability, but what does this have to do with our Hanging Gardens of Babylon? Well, it turns out the Hanging Gardens of Babylon is a ancient era luxury manufactory. It works exactly the same in addition to the 100 points of fame and 20 points of stability. You don't get the 50 points of fame, you don't get the adjacent market quarter, you don't get the 5 points influence, but you get the additional wondrous effect ability. So if you start out your game and you're scouting around for your first couple of cities, and you happen to see that you have a papyrus, you have a dye, you have a salt, you have some very good scaling early game resource, and you have over half the copies. Because if you hover over them, the game will tell you how many total copies there are and how many you need for the wondrous effect. So it'll usually show you 4 or 6. And if you count the number that you have in control, and you see that you have maybe 2 of the 4 in your starting territory, you can easily plan to rush the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And the advantage of this is you get a nice early percentage boost for that resource, and you'll also be able to pick up a huge amount of stability to help you build big cities even without stability boost from things like infrastructure, garrisons, or perhaps picking the Drow culture. And those are all things that will play into a big advantage throughout the game because you're running ahead with this wondrous effect from the ancient era compared to 4 eras down in the early modern. So it's a very big difference. And especially if you notice things like industry or science, which are very good early game advantages to get. If you have a dye, you have an ebony or ambergris, which is in the water actually. So that one's going to be a little tricky. I don't know if you can actually build the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, but I think as long as it's a luxury resource, even if it's in the water, the game should let you build it. And therefore, you can get the bonus that you want. It doesn't have to be those early game scaling ones, because if I'm going to start with Obsidian, which is a percentage boost already, I'm not going to turn down additional 5% boost on that, 3-4 eras earlier. And the stability boost that you get from it is going to be massive. Like if I control 3 of these, that's going to be 14 times 3 or 42 stability for every single city on top of 21%, industry boost for every single city. So this is just a nice little hidden mechanic for Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It doesn't make this the best wonder in the game, and you're not going to be rushing it all the time. But if you do see a bunch of luxury resources of the same type near your starting location, this is definitely a wonder to consider and definitely make it a lot better than what it seems on paper. Because if you consider things like 25%, district construction discount from the Pyramid of Giza and you think that's the best one there is, that's not really true. Because the example we just provided, let's say Obsidian, let's say you only have 2 of them and it only has 4 total. That means, you're going to get 14%, my bad, in terms of the bonus from building the Hanging Garden Babylon, is 14% extra industry in all cities, better than 25% cheaper district construction. Well, I think it is over the long term because the numbers, although it doesn't add up, right? You have 25% discount versus 14% boost. You have to consider the base value. Districts cost X. It's a set number determined in the beginning of the game for every single district. So the discount you can get by 25% is a set discount. But the bonus you can gain from, say, 14% in the beginning where you own only 2 copies, because you can at least go up to 28%, but let's say only 14%. Your base number is variable, right? If I can make 100 industries in a city, 14% is going to give me 14 extra. But if I can have 1,000 industry in a city, 14% is going to give me 140 industry per turn in a city. And this is for every city, by the way. And you can use this to build units. You can use this to build infrastructure. It doesn't have to be just districts. You can use it to build wonders, shared projects, holy sites. Whereas the discount for the pyramid, if the district costs 400, I save 100, right? That's a set amount. I can't increase that or scale that any way in the game. And if I want to build an infrastructure, that bonus doesn't really exist. So it's always better to boost your industry, for example, compared to saving it for one type of building, because that's just not going to be as scalable into the late game as you imagine. So just my little argument for Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. And as a side note, because these come very nicely in these one sheets, I'm actually going to open an Instagram account, which should be live now with these images because it's very easy to share. And if you want to follow, there's going to be a link in the description below, as well as on the pinned comment. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we'll see you guys next time with a different wonder in the game. Until then, bye.